The fluorescent lights of the small office buzzed overhead as Karoline Leavitt rubbed her tired eyes. It was nearly midnight, but she showed no signs of leaving anytime soon. 3 coffee cups, all empty, were scattered across her desk alongside. Stacks of papers, folders, and a laptop showing multiple open tabs. This had become her normal routine over the past few weeks. "You're still here?" The voice came from Tom, one of the senior staffers who poked his head through her office doorway. His tie was loosened, and he looked ready to head home. Karoline nodded without looking up from the document she was highlighting. "Just finishing up some research." Tom stepped into the office and leaned against the doorframe. "You know, nobody would blame you if you took a night off. The hearing isn't for another week." "I can't afford to miss anything," she replied, finally looking up. At 25, Karoline was one of the youngest press secretaries on Capitol Hill. What she lacked in years she made up for in determination and work ethic. Especially not with Schiff involved. The mention of Congressman Adam Schiff made Tom raise his eyebrows. "That's exactly why you should pace yourself. The man has been in Congress since before you were in high school." Karoline placed her highlighter down and stretched her arms above her head. "That's precisely why I need to be prepared. Experience can be intimidating, but facts are facts." The truth was, Karoline hadn't planned on finding herself in any sort of confrontation with the veteran congressman. But over the past month, she had discovered discrepancies in some of his public statements that couldn't be ignored. Especially when they affected policies she believed were important. "Just don't make it personal," Tom warned. "That's how people get burned in this town." "It's not personal," Karoline insisted. "It's about accuracy and accountability. That's the job, isn't it?" After Tom left, Karoline turned back to her work. On her computer screen was a video of Schiff speaking at a press conference 3 months ago. She played it again, listening carefully to his words about the proposed security funding bill. Next to her computer was an official document with very different numbers than what Schiff had quoted. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her roommate. "Leftover pasta in the fridge, don't work all night again." Karoline smiled but didn't reply. Her roommate, a kindergarten teacher, often joked that teaching 5-year-olds was less exhausting than Karoline's job in politics. On nights like this, Karoline couldn't disagree. The next morning, Karoline arrived at the office earlier than usual, carrying a larger coffee than normal. The hallways of the congressional office building were quiet at 6:30 a.m., with only security guards and a few ambitious staffers present. "Morning, Pete," she called to the security guard who had become familiar with her early arrivals. "Another sunrise shift, Ms. Leavitt?" he asked with a warm smile. "You're making the rest of these folks look lazy." She laughed. "Just trying to stay ahead of the game." In her office, Karoline opened her laptop and continued where she'd left off. Today's goal was to organize all her research into a coherent format. She wasn't sure if she'd ever get the chance to present it, but she needed to be ready if the opportunity arose. By 9 a.m., the office was buzzing with activity. Phones ringing, staffers hurrying between meetings. The usual controlled chaos of Capitol Hill. Karoline's boss, Congressman Reynolds, stopped by her office. "How's the prep coming along?" he asked, leaning against her doorframe much like Tom had done the night before. "Getting there," she replied. "I've organized the funding discrepancies by date and have supporting documents for each one." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Good. Just remember, next week's hearing is primarily about the new infrastructure proposal. The committee might not even touch on the security funding issues." "I understand," Karoline said. "But if they do..." "If they do," Reynolds finished for her, "we'll be prepared." He paused, studying her for a moment. "You know, when I hired you, some people thought I was taking a risk on someone so young." Karoline had heard this before but let him continue. "But I saw something in you. A commitment to getting things right, not just winning arguments." He straightened up. "That said, Schiff has powerful allies. Challenging him won't make you popular in certain circles." "I'm not looking to be popular," Karoline replied. "I just want the record to be straight." Reynolds smiled. "And that's exactly why I hired you." He checked his watch. "Staff meeting in 10 minutes." The days that followed fell into a pattern. Karoline would arrive early, work through lunch, and stay late. Her colleagues began to notice her intensity. "You're becoming a bit obsessed," said Lisa, another press secretary, as they grabbed coffee in the break room. "When was the last time you went out for something other than work?" Karoline shrugged. "This is important." "Everything in this place is important," Lisa replied, making air quotes. "But you won't be effective if you burn yourself out." Deep down, Karoline knew Lisa had a point. That evening, she forced herself to leave the office by 7 p.m. and met her brother James for dinner at a small Italian restaurant near Union Station. "You look tired," were his first words when she sat down. "Nice to see you too," she replied with a smirk. James, 4 years older and working as an engineer far from politics, often served as her reality check. "Seriously, Caro, you need to take care of yourself. Politics will still be a mess whether you stay at the office until midnight or not." Karoline sipped her water. "It's just for another week. Once this hearing is over, I'll take a weekend off. Promise." "That's what you said about the last hearing," James pointed out. "And the budget meetings before that." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of food, spaghetti for him, chicken parmesan for her. As they ate, Karoline found herself checking her phone repeatedly. "Okay, that's it," James said, reaching over and sliding her phone away. "No work talk, tell me something, anything that's not related to Congress." Karoline laughed. "Like what?" "I don't know. Are you dating anyone? Have you used that kayak I got you for your birthday? Have you even seen the sun lately?" The questions made Karoline realize how narrow her life had become. "The kayak is still in my storage unit," she admitted. "And no dating, not much time for that." "Make time," James advised. "This job of yours, it'll take everything you give it and still ask for more." The evening with her brother provided a much-needed break, but by the next morning, Karoline was back to her intense preparation. The weekend passed in a blur of research and rehearsal. On Monday, 3 days before the hearing, Karoline received an unexpected visit from Congressman Chen, a senior member of the committee. "Got a minute?" he asked, appearing at her door. "Of course, sir," she replied, quickly standing. Chen closed the door behind him, which was unusual. "I hear you've been doing some digging into Schiff's statements on the security funding bill." Karoline felt a momentary panic. Had she crossed a line? "I've been researching discrepancies in the public record," she said carefully. Chen nodded slowly. "Relax. I'm not here to scold you. Quite the opposite. I've had concerns about those numbers myself, but haven't had the staff resources to look into it properly." Relief washed over her. "I've compiled quite a bit of information," she offered. "So I've heard." Chen paused. "There's been a change to the hearing schedule. We're expanding the scope to include a review of the previous funding allocations." Karoline's heart raced. "That would include the security bill?" "Yes," Chen confirmed. "And I've arranged for staff testimony. Your name came up as someone who might have relevant information to share." This was unexpected. Staff rarely testified at these hearings. That role was typically reserved for the representatives themselves or for expert witnesses. "Would you be comfortable presenting your findings?" Chen asked. "It would be brief, maybe 10 minutes of prepared remarks followed by questions." Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. I'd be ready." After Chen left, Karoline sat at her desk, her mind racing. This was no longer about preparing background information for her boss. She would be speaking on the record, under oath, possibly challenging one of the most experienced members of Congress. The news spread quickly through the office. Some colleagues offered help. Others warned her to be careful. Tom brought her a fresh coffee later that afternoon. "So you're stepping into the arena," he said, placing the cup on her desk. "Looks that way," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "If anyone can handle it, you can," Tom said. "Just stick to the facts and don't let them rattle you." That night, Karoline couldn't sleep. She kept rehearsing what she would say, imagining questions that might come her way, picturing Schiff's response. By dawn, she had given up on sleep and was reviewing her notes at her kitchen table. Her phone rang. It was Congressman Reynolds. "I just heard about Chen's request," he said without preamble. Are you sure about this? It's not too late to back out. I'm sure, Karoline said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. It won't be easy, Reynolds warned. Schiff doesn't take challenges lightly, especially not from staff. I know. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. All right then, my office, 9 a.m. We'll go through your testimony together. As Karoline ended the call, she looked at the stacks of documents and notes spread across her table. For weeks she had immersed herself in these details, driven by a simple belief that the facts mattered. Now, she would have the chance to present them in front of the entire committee and face whatever consequences came with it. She took a deep breath and began organizing her materials for the day ahead. Whatever happened at the hearing, she was determined to be ready. The morning of the hearing arrived with a clear blue sky that belied Karoline's internal storm of nerves. She had barely slept, going over her notes until her eyes burned. Now, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, she straightened her navy blazer and practiced her opening statement one last time. You've got this, she told her reflection, not entirely convinced. Her phone buzzed with a text from Congressman Reynolds. Car downstairs in 15. You ready? She texted back a simple, yes, though ready felt like an overstatement. She gathered her carefully organized binder, tucked it into her briefcase, and took one last look around her apartment before heading out. The black SUV was waiting as promised. Reynolds sat in the back reviewing papers of his own. Morning, he said as she slid in beside him. How are you feeling? Like I might throw up, Karoline admitted with a nervous laugh. Reynolds smiled. That's normal. I still get that feeling. Sometimes, and I've been doing this for years. He closed his folder and turned to face her. Let's go through it one more time. What's your strategy if Schiff tries to interrupt you? Politely acknowledge him but continue my point, she recited. Stay focused on the facts, not the person. And if someone tries to discredit your research? Reference the source documents. I've brought an offer to provide copies. Reynolds nodded approvingly. Good. Remember, in that room, you're not just a staff member. You're an expert witness presenting facts for the record. Own that role. As their car approached the Capitol, Karoline could see news vans parked along the street. The expanded scope of the hearing had attracted more media attention than usual. Looks like a full house today, Reynolds remarked, following her gaze. Inside the building, the energy was palpable. Staffers hurried through hallways, reporters clustered in corners, and security was visibly heightened. Karoline and Reynolds made their way to a small preparation room where other members of their team waited. There she is, said Tom, looking up from his laptop, our woman of the hour. Lisa approached with a cup of coffee. Thought you might need this, she said, handing it to Karoline. It's the strong stuff from the shop downstairs, not the office sludge. Thanks, Karoline said gratefully, taking a sip. For the next 30 minutes, the team reviewed last-minute details. Then a staff member from the committee appeared at the door. Ms. Leavitt, they're ready for you in the chamber. Karoline took a deep breath and stood. Reynolds gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Just like we practiced, he said quietly. The walk to the hearing room felt longer than usual. Karoline could hear the murmur of voices growing louder as they approached. When they entered, the room was indeed packed. Committee members at the curved dais, staffers in chairs behind them, press in their designated area, and public observers filling the remaining seats. Karoline was directed to a table with a microphone and a small nameplate that read Ms. Karoline Leavitt. As she settled in, she scanned the room, her eyes eventually finding Congressman Schiff deep in conversation with an aide. He hadn't noticed her yet. Committee Chairman Wilson called the hearing to order with a bang of his gavel. Good morning. Today's hearing of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform will now come to order. We have an expanded agenda today, including a review of previous funding allocations under the Security Enhancement Act. Wilson continued with procedural announcements while Karoline arranged her materials. She tried to control her breathing, focusing on the task ahead rather than the intimidating setting. After the chairman's introduction, The first hour of the hearing proceeded with testimony from various officials about the new infrastructure proposal. Karoline listened attentively, knowing her turn would come after this segment. Finally, Chairman Wilson announced, "We'll now move to our review of the Security Enhancement Act funding allocations. The committee has called Ms. Karoline Leavitt, press secretary to Congressman Reynolds, to present some findings on this matter." All eyes turned to Karoline. She noticed Schiff looking at her now, his expression a mixture of curiosity and mild concern. "Ms. Leavitt, you have 10 minutes for your opening statement," Wilson said. "You may begin when ready." Karoline adjusted her microphone and took a sip of water. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity. Over the past several weeks, I have been conducting research into the public statements regarding the Security Enhancement Act funding, specifically comparing those statements with the official documentation of fund allocations." She paused, making brief eye contact with Reynolds, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. "What I found were significant discrepancies between what was reported to the public and what actually occurred with these funds." A murmur ran through the room. Karoline continued, her confidence growing with each word. "On March 15th of this year, it was stated in a press conference that $142 million had been allocated to border security technology. However, the Treasury Department's official disbursement records show only $97 million was actually allocated to this purpose." She clicked a button on her laptop, and the relevant documents appeared on the large screens around the room. Similarly, it was claimed that $86 million went to personnel training programs, but Treasury records indicate only $53 million reached these programs, with the remainder being redirected to administrative costs, not specified in the original bill. As Karoline continued presenting her findings, she noticed committee members leaning forward, some taking notes, others whispering to their aides. Schiff's expression had changed from mild concern to something more serious. "Perhaps most concerning," Karoline continued, "is the repeated public assertion that the Act provided $215 million for community safety grants. The actual figure, according to 3 separate Treasury reports, was $118 million. A difference of nearly $100 million. Now there was no mistaking the reaction in the room. Several committee members were openly conferring with each other. Journalists in the press section were typing furiously. "To be clear," Karoline said, "I am not suggesting any impropriety in how these funds were managed. What I am pointing out is a pattern of public statements that do not align with official records, creating a misleading impression about how taxpayer money was spent." She was about to continue when Congressman Schiff raised his hand, catching the chairman's attention. "Mr. Chairman, if I may," Schiff said. Chairman Wilson nodded. "Congressman Schiff, you have the floor." Schiff adjusted his microphone. "Ms. Leavitt, these are serious allegations you're making. Are you suggesting that I or other members of Congress deliberately misrepresented these figures?" The room fell silent. This was the moment Karoline had prepared for, but still, facing Schiff directly sent a wave of anxiety through her. "Congressman, I'm not making allegations about intent," she replied carefully. "I'm simply presenting the factual discrepancies between public statements, including some made by you, and the official record. The Treasury documents speak for themselves." Schiff's expression hardened. "Ms. Leavitt, I've been overseeing government funding allocations since before you were in college. These discrepancies, as you call them, are often the result of different accounting methods or timing of reports." "With respect, Congressman," Karoline replied, "I've accounted for those factors. These aren't small differences in accounting methods. When $100 million less reaches community safety programs than what was publicly announced, that's not a rounding error." A few chuckles could be heard from the dais. Schiff's face flushed slightly. "Mr. Chairman," Schiff said, turning to Wilson, "I request time to respond to these claims with my own staff's analysis." "You'll have that opportunity, Congressman," Wilson assured him. "But let's allow Ms. Leavitt to complete her testimony first," Karoline continued, presenting each discrepancy with supporting documentation. As she neared the end of her allotted time, she could feel the weight of what she had just done. She had publicly challenged one of Congress's most powerful members with cold, hard facts. In conclusion, she said, these discrepancies point to a concerning pattern of misrepresentation about the Security Enhancement Act. The public deserves accurate information about how their tax dollars are spent. I believe this committee has a responsibility to address these inconsistencies and ensure greater transparency going forward. She looked up from her notes. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions. Chairman Wilson nodded. Thank you, Ms. Leavitt. Members of the committee will now have 5 minutes each to ask questions, beginning with Ranking Member Patel. Congressman Patel leaned toward his microphone. Ms. Leavitt, first, I want to commend you for the thoroughness of your research. Can you tell us what prompted this investigation? It wasn't initially an investigation, Congressman, Karoline replied. While preparing materials for Congressman Reynolds regarding the new infrastructure proposal, I was reviewing past similar bills. I noticed the discrepancy in the border, security technology figures by chance, which led me to look more closely at other aspects of the Security Enhancement Act. So this wasn't a targeted effort to discredit Congressman Schiff or others? Patel asked. No, sir. This was about finding the truth, regardless of who made the statements in question. For the next 45 minutes, Karoline fielded questions from committee members. Some were supportive, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. Schiff himself asked several pointed questions, clearly trying to find holes in her research. But Karoline had prepared too thoroughly to be caught off guard. When Congressman Chen took his turn, he asked, Ms. Leavitt, have you found any documentation explaining where the difference in funds, the gap between what was announced and what was allocated, where those funds actually went? That's an excellent question, Congressman, Karoline replied. I have traced some of the funds to general administrative costs, but approximately $78 million remains unaccounted for in the public record. That's why I believe this committee's further investigation is warranted. This answer caused another stir in the room. Even members who had seemed disinterested were now paying attention. As the questioning wound down, Karoline caught Reynolds' eye in the audience. He gave her a subtle thumbs up. Despite her exhaustion and nerves, a sense of accomplishment washed over her. Whatever happened next, she had done what she set out to do: bring the facts to light. Chairman Wilson spoke again. Thank you, Ms. Leavitt. Congressman Schiff, your staff will have an opportunity to present their analysis after our brief recess. This committee will reconvene in 15 minutes. With a bang of the gavel, the session was temporarily adjourned. As people began to move about the room, Karoline gathered her materials, her hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. She had just taken on one of the most powerful members of Congress, and the battle was only half over. The 15-minute recess felt both incredibly short and agonizingly long to Karoline. As soon as the chairman's gavel fell, she was surrounded by a flurry of activity. Reynolds made his way to her side, navigating through the crowd of people now filling the aisles. You did great, he said, his voice low but excited. Better than great. You were bulletproof up there. Karoline managed a smile, though her mouth felt dry. He's going to come back hard after the break. Of course he is, Reynolds agreed. Schiff didn't get where he is by backing down, but neither did you. He handed her a bottle of water. Drink this. We have just a few minutes to prepare for round 2. As Karoline sipped the water, she noticed several journalists trying to catch her attention from the press area. Lisa approached, her expression a mix of awe and concern. Your phone is blowing up, Lisa said, handing Karoline her cell. Every reporter in D.C. wants a comment, and your brother called twice. Karoline glanced at the screen, overwhelmed by the notifications. I'll deal with all that later, she said, tucking the phone away. Across the room, Schiff was huddled with a group of staffers, papers spread between them. He looked intense, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. One of his aides kept glancing. In Karoline's direction, Tom appeared at her elbow. Just got word from a friend on the committee staff. Schiff's team is scrambling. They weren't prepared for this level of detail in your testimony. Good, Reynolds said, but don't get overconfident. He's got decades of experience turning situations around. Karoline nodded, trying to focus. What should I expect when we go back in? He'll try to discredit your research methodology first, Reynolds said. Then he'll likely introduce alternative explanations for the discrepancies. If those don't stick, he might get personal. Personal how? Karoline asked, a new wave of anxiety washing over her. Question your qualifications, imply political motivation, that sort of thing, Reynolds explained. If he goes that route, remember, stick to the facts, Karoline finished for him. I know. A staff member approached to inform them the hearing would resume in 2 minutes. As people began returning to their seats, Congressman Chen passed by, giving Karoline a subtle nod of approval. Back at her table, Karoline opened her laptop to the next set of documents she might need. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. This wasn't about her versus Schiff anymore. It was about the truth and public accountability. The room settled as Chairman Wilson called the hearing back to order. We will now continue with our examination of the Security Enhancement Act funding. Congressman Schiff, you and your staff have requested time to respond to Ms. Leavitt's testimony. You have 10 minutes. Schiff approached the microphone, his demeanor calm and authoritative. 20 years in Congress had made him a master of these moments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address what I believe are misunderstandings in Ms. Leavitt's presentation. He turned slightly to look directly at Karoline before continuing. While I commend Ms. Leavitt's dedication to transparency, I must point out several critical flaws in her analysis. First and foremost, she has compared preliminary allocation announcements with final disbursement reports, essentially comparing apples to oranges. Schiff clicked a button, and his own set of documents appeared on the screens. As committee members, no initial funding announcements represent target allocations. The final numbers often differ due to a variety of factors, including administrative adjustments, cost-saving measures, and reallocation to emerging priorities. This is standard procedure, not deception, as Ms. Leavitt implies. Karoline felt her face flush. She hadn't implied deception. She'd been careful not to make that accusation. She made a note on her pad as Schiff continued. Let's take the border security technology funding as an example. Ms. Leavitt correctly noted the initial announcement of $142 million and the final allocation of $97 million. What she failed to mention was the technology procurement contract that came in $38 million under budget due to competitive bidding, a success story of fiscal responsibility, not a discrepancy to be concerned about. Murmurs rippled through the committee. Schiff was good, Karoline had to admit. He presented his explanation with complete confidence, making her research seem shallow by comparison. As for the community safety grants, Schiff continued, the difference between the announced $215 million and the allocated $118 million that Ms. Leavitt highlighted is easily explained by the supplemental appropriations bill passed 2 months after the original act. Those funds were not missing as implied. They were simply distributed through a different legislative vehicle, which Ms. Leavitt's research apparently overlooked. Karoline frowned. She hadn't overlooked anything. The supplemental bill Schiff mentioned was separate funding, not a reallocation of the original money. She made another note, her pen pressing hard against the paper. Mr. Chairman, I have here the complete reconciliation of all funds from the Security Enhancement Act, accounting for every dollar from announcement to final disbursement. Schiff held up a thick binder. I'm happy to submit this for the record and provide copies to all committee members and to Ms. Leavitt, whose diligence I respect despite these oversights. The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. Karoline kept her expression neutral, though her stomach tightened. In conclusion, Schiff said, while transparency and oversight are essential functions of this committee, we must be careful not to create controversy where none exists. These normal variances between announced and final allocations are well documented and follow established procedures of congressional appropriations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Schiff returned to his seat, Karoline could feel the momentum shifting. His explanation sounded reasonable and made her concerns seem like the result of inexperience rather than actual problems. She looked down at her notes, mentally preparing her response if given the chance. Chairman Wilson spoke again. Thank you, Congressman Schiff. At this time, I'll open the floor for questions from committee members. Congressman Patel, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Patel leaned forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Ms. Leavitt. Given Congressman Schiff's explanation about the supplemental appropriations bill, would you like to revise your assessment of the community safety grants funding? This was her opening. Karoline adjusted her microphone. Thank you for the question, Congressman. With all due respect to Congressman Schiff, the supplemental appropriations bill he referenced allocated new funding for community safety, not a reallocation of the original $215 million announced under the Security Enhancement Act. If I may direct the committee's attention to Exhibit C in my materials. She brought up a new document on the screen, a side-by-side comparison of the original act and the supplemental bill, with relevant sections highlighted. As you can see, the supplemental bill specifically states that its provisions are, in addition to funds previously allocated under the original act. This language makes it clear that these were separate allocations, not a redistribution of the same money. A hush fell over the room. Karoline continued, her voice growing stronger. Furthermore, if we look at the Treasury Department's quarterly disbursement report from June, after both bills had been implemented, it still shows only $118 million disbursed from the original act, with no explanation for the $97 million difference between that and the announced $215 million. She clicked to another document, the Treasury report with the relevant figures highlighted. This isn't about comparing preliminary announcements to final numbers, as Congressman Schiff suggested. This is about a significant discrepancy that remains unexplained in official documentation, even after accounting for the supplemental bill. Karoline could see several committee members reviewing her exhibits with renewed interest. Schiff was writing furiously, conferring with an aide. Congressman, Patel looked impressed. Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Leavitt. Congressman Schiff, would you care to respond? Schiff straightened his tie before speaking. Ms. Leavitt is correct about the language in the supplemental bill. However, what she may not be aware of is the internal departmental directive that reallocated funds between these two legislative vehicles. This is admittedly a complex accounting practice, but one that's used regularly. If I may, Karoline interjected, I've reviewed all publicly available departmental directives related to these funds, and none mention this reallocation. If such a directive exists, it hasn't been made public, which only underscores my concern about transparency. For the first time, Schiff looked genuinely caught off guard. He shuffled through his papers. The directive may not have been published yet, but I assure the committee it exists. Congressman Chen spoke up. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Are we to take Congressman Schiff's word about an unpublished directive that none of us can verify? Airman R. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. It's a fair question. Congressman Schiff, can you provide this directive to the committee? I will have my staff located and submitted after the hearing. Schiff replied, his usual confidence wavering slightly. Wilson turned to Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, what about the border security technology funding? Congressman Schiff mentioned a contract that came in under budget. Were you aware of this? Yes, Mr. Chairman, Karoline replied. I referenced that contract on page 17 of my report. The contract was indeed $38 million under budget, but that still leaves approximately $7 million unaccounted for between the announced $142 million and the allocated $97 million even after the $38 million savings. She brought up yet another document, a spreadsheet with all the border security technology contracts. Additionally, if the funds were saved through efficient contracting, one would expect those savings to be publicly celebrated and the funds reallocated to other security priorities. Instead, there's no public record of where those saved funds went. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, with committee members from both parties digging deeper into the discrepancies. With each round, Karoline's detailed research held firm against Schiff's increasingly strained explanations. By the time Chairman Wilson called on the final questioner, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. What had begun as a standard oversight, hearing had become something much more significant, a serious examination of potential misrepresentations about public funds. Congressman Torres, you have 5 minutes. Wilson announced. Torres, known for his direct questioning style, wasted no time. Ms. Leavitt, in your professional opinion, what should happen next regarding these discrepancies? Karoline considered her words carefully. I believe this committee should formally request a full accounting of all funds from the Security Enhancement Act, with particular attention to the discrepancies I've outlined today. The public deserves to know exactly how their tax dollars are being spent, whether those dollars achieved their intended purpose, and if not, why not? Torres nodded. And Congressman Schiff, do you support such an investigation? All eyes turned to Schiff. It was a perfect trap. Opposing transparency now would look terrible, especially after Karoline's compelling testimony. After a moment's hesitation, Schiff leaned toward his microphone. Of course I support transparency, Congressman. If the committee believes a formal inquiry is warranted, I won't stand in the way. Torres smiled slightly. I'm glad to hear it. Mr. Chairman, I move that we establish a subcommittee to investigate these funding discrepancies, with both Ms. Leavitt and Congressman Schiff's staff providing their full documentation. Seconded, called another member. Chairman. Wilson nodded. We'll put that to a vote at the end of today's session. For now, I want to thank both Congressman Schiff and Ms. Leavitt for their testimony. This has been an illuminating discussion. As the hearing moved on to other matters, Karoline felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had stood her ground against one of the most powerful members of Congress, and her facts had prevailed. Reynolds caught her eye from across the room and mouthed 2 words. You won. But as Karoline gathered her materials, she knew this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about accountability, and on that front the real work was just beginning. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur for Karoline. She remained seated at the witness table as required, though her testimony was complete. Her mind raced, replaying the exchange with Schiff, analyzing what had just happened and what would come next. From time to time, she noticed committee members glancing her way, some with newfound respect, others with cautious reassessment. When Chairman Wilson finally adjourned the session 3 hours later, the room erupted into motion and noise. Karoline began gathering her materials, her hands steadier now than they had been all day. She felt a presence beside her and looked up to see Congressman Chen. That was quite something, he said quietly. You should be proud. Before Karoline could respond, journalists began calling out questions from the press area. The chairman's aide quickly approached. Ms. Leavitt, we need to clear the room for the next session. There's a side exit this way if you'd prefer to avoid the press. Karoline looked at Reynolds, who had joined them. He shook his head slightly. No need to hide, he said. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did everything right. With a deep breath, Karoline nodded and followed Reynolds toward the main exit. As they approached, the press corps surged forward, a wall of cameras and microphones. Ms. Leavitt, what motivated you to challenge Congressman Schiff? Did you expect your testimony to cause such a stir? Has there been any backlash from party leadership? Reynolds stepped slightly ahead, creating a buffer. Ms. Leavitt provided factual testimony at the committee's request. She'll have a formal statement later today. That's all for now. They pushed through the crowd, Karoline keeping her expression neutral despite the cameras flashing inches from her face. In the hallway, security personnel helped clear a path to Reynolds' office. Once inside with the door closed, Karoline finally exhaled. The office staff, who had been watching the hearing on C-SPAN, broke into spontaneous applause. Karoline felt her cheeks flush. All right, everyone, back to work, Reynolds said, though he was smiling too. Tom, draft a press statement. Lisa, start monitoring the media coverage. I want to know how this is playing out there. He guided Karoline to his private office and closed the door. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair. You look like you're about to collapse. Karoline sank into the seat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the hearing was fading, leaving her drained. I can't believe that just happened, she said. Reynolds sat across from her. Don't believe it, you just made history in that room. Not many staffers ever get the chance to testify, let alone stand their ground against someone like Schiff. What happens now? Karoline asked. Now? A lot of things. The committee voted to create that subcommittee to investigate the discrepancies. That's a big deal. Your research will be the foundation of their work. He leaned back in his chair. Politically, there will be fallout. Schiff has allies who won't be happy. Others who've had issues with him over the years will see an opportunity. The media will dissect every word from today's exchange. And for me? Karoline asked, suddenly worried about her own future. Reynolds smiled. For you, I'd say the sky's the limit. You've earned a reputation for integrity and thoroughness that most people work decades to build. But for tonight, I suggest you go home, turn off your phone, and get some rest. Karoline nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with her mind still racing. As Reynolds predicted, the media coverage was immediate and intense. By the time Karoline left the Capitol, escorted by Reynolds' chief of staff to avoid the worst of the press, clips of her testimony were already playing on news channels. Her phone had dozens of missed calls and hundreds of notifications. One text from her brother simply read, "Holy cow, sis. Call me when you can breathe." At home, Karoline kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her couch. Despite Reynolds' advice, she couldn't resist checking the news coverage. Every major outlet had picked up the story, with headlines ranging from junior staffer challenges congressional veteran on missing millions to Schiff on defense, funding discrepancies exposed in hearing. Her doorbell rang, startling her. Karoline approached cautiously and checked the peephole to see Lisa holding a paper bag. "Delivery service," Lisa announced when Karoline opened the door. "I brought dinner and moral support." Inside, Lisa unpacked containers of Thai food while Karoline found plates. "The office is insane," Lisa reported. "Every reporter in D.C. is calling. Reynolds has been on the phone nonstop with party leadership, and you've got fan mail." "Fan mail?" Karoline repeated incredulously. "Well, emails. Lots of staffers from other offices sending congratulations, even some from across the aisle. Apparently, Schiff isn't universally beloved." They settled at Karoline's small dining table with their food. "How are you really doing?" Lisa asked after a few minutes of eating in comfortable silence. Karoline poked at her pad thai. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Part of me is still in shock. Another part is waiting for the other shoe to drop." "What do you mean?" "People like Schiff don't just accept defeat, especially not from someone like me. He's going to fight back." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "Probably. But you've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The receipts," Lisa said with a grin. "Every claim you made today was backed up by documentation. He can spin all he wants, but he can't change the Treasury reports or the official records." Karoline managed to smile, though anxiety still gnawed at her. "I hope you're right." Later, that night after Lisa had gone, Karoline's prediction about sleep proved accurate. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying the hearing, imagining what she could have said differently, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Her phone buzzed with a text at 11:42 p.m. It was from Tom. "Heads up, Schiff going on national review tomorrow morning. Prep call with Reynolds at 7 a.m. Sleep became even more elusive after that. The next morning brought gray skies and a light drizzle. Karoline arrived at the office by 6:45, coffee in hand, dark circles under her eyes despite her best efforts with concealer. Reynolds was already there, watching news coverage on a muted television while reading something on his tablet. "Morning," he said as Karoline entered. "Rough night?" "You could say that," she replied, dropping into a chair. "What's Schiff going to say?" "We'll find out soon enough. His segment is at 8:30. Reynolds put down his tablet. "But that's not our most immediate concern." Something in his tone made Karoline sit up straighter. "What is?" Reynolds handed her his tablet. On screen was an article from a political blog known for its aggressive reporting. Karoline Leavitt, rising star or political. Hit woman? Sources questioned timing of Schiff takedown. Karoline's stomach dropped as she skimmed the article. It suggested her testimony was part of a coordinated attack on Schiff, timed to distract from other political issues. It questioned her qualifications and implied she had been coached to target Schiff specifically. "This is ridiculous," she said, handing back the tablet. "None of this is true." "Of course it isn't," Reynolds agreed. "But it's just the beginning. Schiff has friends in media who will try to change the narrative from the facts you presented to questions about you and your motives." Tom and Lisa arrived, along with several other staff members. Reynolds outlined their strategy. No direct responses to personal attacks, continued focus on the factual discrepancies, and preparation for Karoline to potentially testify again before the new subcommittee. At 8:30, they gathered around the television to watch Schiff's interview. He appeared calm and collected, dressed impeccably as always. "Congressman, yesterday's hearing took an unexpected turn," the host began. "Your thoughts on the allegations made by Karoline Leavitt?" Schiff nodded solemnly. "First, let me say that I welcome oversight and transparency. That's an essential function of Congress. What concerns me is the apparent political motivation behind yesterday's theatrics." "Political motivation?" the host prompted. "Yes. Ms. Leavitt is a talented young woman, but she's also a staffer for Congressman Reynolds, who has opposed my policies for years. The timing of these allegations, just as we're approaching crucial votes on several major bills, strikes me as more than coincidental." Karoline felt her face grow hot with anger. Reynolds put a hand on her shoulder. "He's trying to make this about you, not the facts," he said quietly. "That's how you know you've got him on the defensive." On screen, Schiff continued his reframing effort. "The discrepancies Ms. Leavitt identified are primarily the result of normal accounting adjustments and fund reallocations that happen with every major appropriations bill. What she presented as mysterious missing millions are actually well-documented transfers that my office will be happy to explain in detail to the subcommittee." "So you're saying there's no actual issue with the funding?" the host asked. "I'm saying that complex government funding rarely follows a straight line from appropriation to disbursement. There are always adjustments, always reallocations based on emerging needs. That's not a scandal, that's governance." The interview continued for another 10 minutes, with Schiff masterfully weaving between acknowledging the need for transparency and implying that Karoline's testimony was politically motivated and based on an incomplete understanding of government finance. When it ended, Reynolds muted the television. "Thoughts?" "He's good," Tom admitted. "Managed to sound reasonable while completely dismissing the actual issues. And he kept bringing it back to Karoline's age and experience," Lisa added. "Classic undermining technique." Karoline had been taking notes throughout the interview. "He mentioned well-documented transfers several times, but he still hasn't produced any actual documentation. Not in the hearing? Not here." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Stay focused on that point. If these transfers are so well documented, where are the documents?" The day unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. More news coverage, more phone calls, more strategy sessions. By afternoon, Karoline had received a formal request to appear before the newly formed subcommittee the following week. "They're not wasting any time," Reynolds remarked when she showed him the letter. "Is that good or bad?" Karoline asked. "Good for transparency, bad for Schiff. The faster this moves, the less time he has to change the narrative." As the day wore on, a new development emerged. Congressman Chen's office reached out to inform them that 2 other staffers had come forward with similar concerns about funding discrepancies in different bills, both connected to committees where Schiff held influence. "It's becoming a pattern," Reynolds said thoughtfully. "This could go beyond just the Security Enhancement Act." By evening, the story had evolved from a single confrontation between a staffer and a congressman to a broader question about transparency in government spending. Several editorial boards were calling for a full audit of recent appropriations bills, citing Karoline's testimony as evidence of potential systemic issues. As Karoline prepared to leave the office, Reynolds stopped her. "The Speaker wants to meet with you tomorrow," he said. Karoline froze. "The Speaker of the House?" Reynolds nodded. "Your testimony has opened up something bigger than any of us anticipated. The leadership wants to hear directly from you." Walking home in the fading light, Karoline felt the weight of what was happening. What had begun as a simple research project had escalated into something that was now involving the highest levels of Congress. Her phone rang. Her brother calling for the 5th time that day. This time, she answered. "Finally," he exclaimed. "I was beginning to think you'd been whisked away to a witness protection program." Karoline laughed, the sound strange to her own ears after such an intense day. "Sorry, it's been non-stop craziness. I bet. You're all over the news, you know. My little sister, the congressional whistleblower." "I'm not a whistleblower," Karoline protested. "I just presented the facts." "Facts that no one else had the courage to point out," her brother countered. "That makes you either very brave or very naive. I'm choosing to believe it's the former." As they talked, Karoline passed a newsstand where her face looked back at her from the front page of an evening paper. The headline read, "Funding Fight Escalates. Leavitt versus Schiff Showdown Continues." It was surreal, seeing herself thrust into the spotlight this way. 24 hours ago, she had been an unknown staffer doing routine research. Now she was at the center of a growing controversy that could reshape how Congress handled public funds. "Are you scared?" her brother asked, his tone more serious now. Karoline considered the question as she continued walking home. Not scared, exactly. More aware of the responsibility of the stakes. People are watching now. I can't afford to get anything wrong. "Just remember why you started this in the first place," her brother advised. "It wasn't about taking down Schiff or getting famous. It was about the truth." "The truth," Karoline repeated. "Seems simple enough, doesn't it?" But as she approached her apartment building and noticed a news van parked across the street, Karoline knew that nothing about the days ahead would be simple. The confrontation in the hearing room had been just the beginning. The real battle for transparency, for accountability, for the truth, was only getting started. The speaker's office was larger and more impressive than Karoline had imagined. Rich wood paneling lined the walls, historic paintings hung in ornate frames, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. Karoline sat on an antique couch, her portfolio clutched tightly in her lap, trying not to appear as nervous as she felt. Reynolds sat beside her, calm and collected as always. They had arrived 15 minutes early for the meeting and now waited as the speaker finished a phone call in the adjacent room. "Remember," Reynolds said quietly, "just be yourself. The, same person who spoke truth in that hearing room. That's who the speaker wants to meet?" Karoline nodded, though her mouth felt dry. Meeting with the Speaker of the House was far beyond anything she had anticipated when she first noticed those funding discrepancies weeks ago. The door opened, and the Speaker entered, followed by 2 senior staff members. Everyone stood. Despite seeing her countless times on television, Karoline was struck by how much more commanding the Speaker's presence was in person. "Congressman Reynolds, good to see you," the Speaker said, shaking his hand before turning to Karoline. "And Ms. Leavitt, I've been looking forward to meeting you." "It's an honor, Madam Speaker," Karoline replied, grateful that her voice remained steady. They sat, and the Speaker wasted no time getting to the point. "Your testimony 2 days ago has created quite a stir, Ms. Leavitt, not just in Congress, but across the country. People are suddenly very interested in appropriations accounting, not typically a topic that captures public attention." Karoline couldn't tell if this was criticism or praise. "I didn't intend to create a stir, Madam Speaker. I was just presenting the facts as I found them." The Speaker studied her for a moment. "Tell me, what made you dig into these numbers in the first place? Why not just accept the public statements at face value as most people do?" It was a fair question, and one Karoline had asked herself many times over the past weeks. "It started as routine research," she explained. "I was looking for precedents related to the new infrastructure proposal. When I noticed the first discrepancy, I thought it was just a typo or a minor accounting difference, but then I found another and another, each one larger than the last." She leaned forward slightly. "At some point, it stopped being about research and became about responsibility. These are public funds. The people have a right to know where their money goes. That's what drove me to keep digging." The Speaker nodded thoughtfully. "And did you consider the potential fallout? For Congressman Schiff, for your party, For yourself? I considered that there would be resistance, Karoline admitted. But I still believe, that accountability matters more than political considerations. If we can't be honest about how we spend taxpayer money, what can we be honest about? A hint of a smile appeared on the speaker's face. Well said. She turned to one of her aides. Show them. The aide handed over a tablet displaying a national news website. The headline read, Treasury Department announces full audit of security. Enhancement Act funding. After congressional testimony reveals discrepancies. Karoline's eyes widened as she read the first paragraph. The Treasury Secretary had ordered a comprehensive review of all transactions related to the act, citing significant concerns about transparency and accuracy in public reporting. This just posted 10 minutes ago, the speaker said. The Treasury Secretary called me this morning. Your testimony has prompted the first full-scale funding audit in over 5 years. Reynolds leaned forward to read the article. This is substantial, he said carefully. It's more than substantial, the speaker replied. It's unprecedented. Treasury doesn't take this kind of action without serious cause. They've reviewed the evidence Ms. Leavitt presented and found it compelling enough to launch a department-wide investigation. She fixed her gaze on Karoline. Which brings me to the reason for this meeting. This audit will be extensive. They'll need your cooperation, your documentation, and your testimony. It will mean even more scrutiny, more pressure. I understand, Karoline said. I'm prepared to help however I can. Good. Because there's more. The speaker handed her a folder. The subcommittee formed to investigate your findings has expanded its scope. They're now looking at 5 additional appropriations bills where similar discrepancies may exist. Karoline opened the folder to find a formal letter requesting her assistance as a special advisor to the subcommittee. A significant promotion from simply testifying as a witness. They need someone who understands both the technical aspects of appropriations and the importance of public accountability, the speaker explained. Your name was the unanimous choice. Karoline looked up in surprise. Unanimous? Even the members from Congressman Schiff's party? The speaker nodded. Accountability isn't partisan, Ms. Leavitt. At least it shouldn't be. You've earned respect across the aisle by focusing on facts rather than finger-pointing. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, covering logistics, expectations, and next steps. As they prepared to leave, the speaker had one final comment for Karoline. What you've started here has the potential to change how Congress handles public funds for years to come. That's no small thing. Stay focused on the facts, just as you have been, and you'll continue to serve the public well. Outside the speaker's office, Karoline finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for days. So, Reynolds said with a smile, still think you're just a press secretary doing routine research? Karoline shook her head, still processing everything that had just happened. This is way bigger than me now. It always was, Reynolds replied. You just had the courage to bring it to light. Over the next week, Karoline's life transformed completely. She was temporarily reassigned from Reynolds's office to work directly with the subcommittee. A small team of accountants and legal experts was assembled to support her. Her research methods became a template for examining other appropriations bills. The media attention continued, though it shifted from focus on the Schiff confrontation to the broader implications of the Treasury audit and congressional investigation. Karoline did one carefully planned interview with a respected news program, where she emphasized the importance of transparency rather than casting blame. This isn't about any individual or party, she said on national television. It's about ensuring that public statements about taxpayer money match the reality of how that money is spent. The American people deserve nothing less. 10 days after the hearing, Karoline received a message that Congressman Schiff wanted to meet privately. Reynolds advised against it, concerned it could be a trap, but Karoline decided to go. If this is going to be about true accountability, I need to be willing to talk to everyone involved, she explained. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room in the Capitol. Schiff was alone when Karoline arrived, no staff or allies present. This surprised her. Politicians of his stature rarely took meetings without witnesses. Ms. Leavitt, he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Thank you for coming. Karoline sat down, maintaining her professional composure despite her apprehension. Congressman, Schiff looked tired, the past week having clearly taken its toll. I'll be direct. The Treasury audit has already identified several of the discrepancies you highlighted. They've also found others that even you missed. This was not what Karoline had expected to hear. I see, she said carefully. Some of these discrepancies occurred under my direct oversight, Schiff continued, while I maintain that there was no intentional misrepresentation. The fact remains that the public statements did not match the actual allocations. That's a failure of transparency regardless of intent. He slid a folder across the table. This is a statement I'll be releasing tomorrow. I wanted you to see it first. Karoline opened the folder and quickly scanned the document. It was a public acknowledgement of the funding discrepancies and a commitment to work with the subcommittee and Treasury to implement new transparency measures. There was no attack on Karoline, no attempt to shift blame or change the narrative. This is very straightforward, Karoline said, looking up at him. Schiff nodded. Sometimes the best response to a difficult truth is to acknowledge it and work to do better. It took me a few days to remember that. He leaned forward slightly. Ms. Leavitt, you and I will probably never be allies. We have different views on many issues. But on the matter of public accountability, I've come to respect your position. What you did took courage. Karoline wasn't sure how to respond. This was the last thing she had expected from this meeting. Thank you, Congressman, she finally said. I appreciate your willingness to engage with these findings constructively. After the meeting, Karoline walked through the Capitol building, taking a moment to absorb what had just happened. The marble halls echoed with history, with countless political battles fought over centuries. Her small research project had somehow become part of that ongoing story. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. You're trending again. Treasury just released preliminary audit findings confirming your research. Talk about vindication. Attached was a link to a news article summarizing the Treasury's initial report. The headline read, Treasury confirms funding discrepancies. Leavitt vindicated new oversight measures proposed. Karoline found a quiet bench and sat down, opening the article. The audit had not only confirmed her findings, but had discovered similar patterns in other legislation. The Treasury Secretary was proposing new reporting requirements to ensure future transparency. As she read, Karoline noticed a quote from an unnamed Treasury official. Ms. Leavitt's testimony was a catalyst for long overdue reforms in how we report public spending. Her attention to detail and commitment to accuracy exemplify the best of public service. 3 weeks ago, Karoline had been an unknown press secretary, working late nights on routine research. Now her work was changing how the federal government reported its spending. It was almost too much to comprehend. Her phone rang, her brother calling. Have you seen the news? He asked without preamble. Just reading it now, Karoline replied. They're saying this could lead to the most significant transparency reforms in decades, he said, his voice filled with pride. All because my little sister decided to check the math. Karoline smiled, looking up at the Capitol dome above her. I was just doing my job. Well, your job just changed how Congress works, her brother replied. Not bad for a month's work. That evening, the subcommittee held its first formal session. As Karoline took her seat at the table, no longer as a witness, but as a special advisor, she caught Congressman Chen's eye. He gave her a subtle nod of respect. Chairman Wilson called the meeting to order. We gather today to begin an important process of ensuring accountability and transparency in government spending. The work before us was made possible by the diligence and courage of one individual who refused to ignore discrepancies when she found them. He looked directly at Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, on behalf of this committee and the American people, thank you for your service to our democracy. Your commitment to truth has made our government stronger. As applause filled the room, Karoline felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why she had come to Washington in the first place, not for power or prestige, but to make government work better for the people it served. The path forward would not be easy. There would be resistance to change, political obstacles, and complicated systems to reform. But looking around the room at the assembled members of Congress, staff, and experts all focused on creating better accountability, Karoline knew that what had begun as her solitary research project had grown into something much larger than herself. And in that growth lay the true power of democracy, the ability of one person, armed with facts and conviction, to create change that would benefit all.